Welcome to Wealthy Mind, where we talk about all things finances, the good, the bad, the ugly, and the surprising.
Hello, welcome to Wealthy Mind. I am your host, Misty Rose Gold, International Success Coach, and today I have with me Todd Huettner. Hi, Todd.
Hello,
How are you today?
I'm doing great. How have
Good.
you been?
I'm awesome. What's making your day great?
Helping people. In one case, I was in a position where we can't do an assumption. I know it's what you wanted to talk about today. Coincidentally, that's actually what it was. And in another case, um, it, we can't do an assumption, but it actually wouldn't have really helped in many ways because there was so much other stuff going on.
Hmm.
And so was able to put together a solution that helped a lady keep the house, even though she had the opportunity to do an assumption,
Hmm.
and the solution really didn't allow for it. But we're in a position where she can keep the house. She literally would not have been able to keep the house beyond 60 days, just can't make the payments on everything.
Mm.
And so by getting everything situated for her, getting everything coordinated to meet needs um, of her husband, then we have
Hmm.
a path forward, and she can be in control, completely in control of that. And then actually another good thing I did today, had a conference call with a client about a post-nup. She doesn't want to get divorced, but there's a lot of issues.
Mm.
So I suggested that maybe a post-nuptial, and it was in a conversation over time with her, but a post-nuptial to accomplish some of these things that she really felt divorce would financially. But she wants to stay together for the kids, and he does too. And it's a good relationship aside from a few of these just friction problems. So
Mm.
that's actually, it's kind of unusual where I always ask people, are you really there yet? And oftentimes people don't go through divorce. There's been several within the last 90 days where they've really taken some time to go back and be deliberate in their efforts. But in this case, um, she still specifically needs my efforts to help her craft, really think about and craft what does she really want. And I told her, I
Mhm.
said, look, if you have this set up like you would end up where you would be divorced, I think it takes all that stress and all this friction off of both of you that you're feeling. And I really think you
Mhm.
end up kind of freeing yourself from that, and you probably end up with a much better relationship. So
Yeah. It,
oftentimes I'm helping people figure out how not to get divorced.
yeah, that's great. So we've dropped the term divorce and loan assumptions. Please tell people what your business is.
So it's actually ancillary to that. I run a mortgage bank, Huettner Capital, and focus on complex transactions, and that can include higher net worth individuals, portfolios of rental properties, or just other property.
Hmm.
It can also include estate, probate issues, and divorce. And divorce is one of the most frequently occurring issues, and there's just a lot of unique things. And truly, some of my best achievements come in helping people keep the house, or just different aspects of related to
Hmm.
divorce. So it's just as rewarding as helping someone become a first-time home buyer, to help a mom, a teacher who's really not sure how she can do this, help work with her spouse, their attorneys, to craft solutions where they can keep the house. And because frankly, renting is more expensive than keeping the house oftentimes. So it's a really
Hmm.
big challenge, especially with where we are, not just with housing prices, particularly in Denver, most of Colorado, but also with the, spike in interest rates last year.
Hmm.
Um, so that's just been a really big focus and over the last 20 years.
So before we dive into loan assumptions and you explaining to us what that is, What started you on this path of working with people going through divorce? Like there's something in your story somewhere that triggered this, hey, I got to go serve this demographic of people. What was that?
It was by accident. I yeah. So I've been in real estate for about 30 years. My family had Class B and C office space and did some light industrial development. And I just started helping doing property management and doing other things. And
Hmm.
next thing I know, I'd had to read leases. My dad was forcing me to read a lease and forcing, but lightly used term. But at the end of the day, it was a huge benefit. I ended up getting my real estate license in as I finished college, and then I was
Okay.
licensed in a couple states. So started doing that. Didn't ever think about lending. In fact, didn't want to do it. I mean, I knew a bunch of people who were, but I just knew so much about real estate. I'm a finance brain, and I would was doing consulting, but I would just run numbers for friends. And so people talked about getting into lending. Like you know
Mm,
more about this than anyone, and it's just your background, your perspective, and you're doing this better than they are, and you know more than they are. You should really do it. So I had some people I really trusted who talked to me and said, you really should. So I did. I started doing that in 2003, and within a year, um, I just had a bunch of people coming to me for the more difficult
mm,
situations.
sure.
Um, and I didn't even realize it until I looked back. Um, and so it was just, I think, my breadth and depth of knowledge, also with my process from consulting,
Hmm.
and then tying in the financial piece, that I was able to put the components together in solutions. And about one after 12 months, I'd worked with 15 people who were trying to figure out this divorce thing. How do we, couples, generally it was couples coming to me. How do we separate our finances without destroying our financial lives? And we want to be
Hmm.
fair to each other. We want to protect ourselves. We want to protect our kids. We don't know what we don't know. And I mean, to be honest, most mistakes are not poor decisions, they're lack of information. And so that's when I realized, holy cow, there's a ton of people here who need help. And so I never really intended to go in that direction. I didn't even tell people I did it at all, even as a
Mm,
kind of a specialty
yeah,
for years. But over time, people just kept getting referred to me. And then professionals, attorneys, and financial professionals would start referring their clients to me for help. And
sure.
then I had people coming to me after the fact. So when they would come after the fact trying to help them solve problems, that was actually another really interesting aspect because I got to see all the different ways people screwed it up. So in a
Yeah.
sense, that's a big part of it as well. So what really wasn't intentional, it's just going to happen.
Yeah, it shows you like me becoming a coach, it shows me. So I think those are some of the best careers is when it chooses us. And I love that that's how you stepped into this. Life just kept throwing these things at you of, hey, work with people going through divorce. I know it's very specialized, and even more specialized is the loan assumption process, which usually occurs in strange or divorce situations, right? So,
Yeah.
would you please explain to us what is a loan assumption? Why would you need it?
Yeah. So a loan assumption is where you're taking over the payments,
Hmm.
and it can occur in different situations. A simple assumption is where you just voluntarily start making payments. And that makes sense more if you think about it in an estate situation where if a grandparent or parent who's elderly passes away, you can just start making the payments. There's a
Mm,
process you
okay.
can do. There's a process you can do to take over that, but that's as simple as it is. You can just voluntarily make the payments without having any obligation. The difference in divorce is that the other party, the spouse who's not staying with the house, they must get off that loan. And
Mm,
so
okay.
the one spouse can voluntarily start making payments, but what people don't know is even though that court order or that agreement filed with the court becoming a court order requires the spouse who keeps the house to make the payments, it doesn't eliminate the obligation of the other spouse who's on that mortgage. So whether they were on it by themselves or whether they were both on the loan together, they need to have that liability and obligation removed, or they are at great risk going forward of an accidental payment being late, really hurting their credit. And at the end of the day, they're still on the hook for that full obligation of repayment of the entire loan. So the credit qualifying assumption process is where the spouse staying behind goes through the underwriting process essentially
Hmm.
to show that they have sufficient credit and all of the requirements to take on that loan by themselves
Hmm.
and release their other spouse from that. So that's what we're talking about when we talk about assumption. And it's a really big deal right now. For the last 30 years, we've been in a declining interest rate environment. So when new interest rates ever move far away from where the average interest rate was on a mortgage, it was usually lower. And
Hmm.
it never, while they were both trending down, it would dip a little and come back up. But after COVID, when we had exceptionally unusually low rates for a few years, and
Yeah.
then when the Fed started increasing rates, the average spread between the kind of average interest rate out there versus current rates was between 3 and 5%. Right now it's
Hmm.
around 3, but last October, interest rates on loans were um, basically high sevens, almost 8%. So when you consider a lot of people were in the 2 to 3% range, that was
Hmm.
a five or more percent difference. So it functionally wasn't even affordable. And so that's where there was this huge, like assumptions have always been out there, but they really never mattered. And so
Okay.
now we were in a position where over a few years, this could be well over $100,000 in savings. So not only is it a savings opportunity, but quite frequently, you had a spouse who couldn't afford to keep the house. So
Mm.
it was a huge problem to overcome, an opportunity to seize as well as a problem to solve to allow people to keep the homes.
Okay, so let me see if I understand this correctly. I'm just going to throw out a scenario. I want to simplify it in my brain.
Yeah,
Two people are married, they're both on the loan. One person is staying in the house and one person is leaving. The person in the house wants to assume the loan. That's what we're talking about, correct?
yeah, exactly.
Okay, got it.
But they're still both on the loan.
Yeah.
So this person will go through the credit qualifying process
Hmm.
so that they can qualify by themselves to meet all the requirements of that loan. And then there will be an agreement in writing freeing this person. The title part is easy.
Okay.
You can sign a quit claim deed. And oftentimes people get into trouble by doing that and thinking it solves this other problem because their agreement or the court orders say that this spouse is still responsible. But the person that's departing needs to have that removed. So there's a formal process and then a formal document that removes this person from their obligation to the payment and to the timely payment on a
Mm.
monthly basis for their credit. So that process is where they would assume and take over that process. And then the credit qualifying piece is where it relieves them of the obligation.
Thank you for that. I appreciate all the information that you're sharing because this is a time where divorce is still really high. The divorce rate is still really high because of COVID. Like you were saying in our pre-interview conversation, people had to face each other. They were no longer able to run about and do all the things and distracted themselves from
Right.
whatever it is, right? So we're still seeing the impact of that in our marriage community. Now people are still moving toward divorce because, wait, I'm still facing this person. There's still the issues, right? We haven't
Yeah.
resolved these issues. Now we actually have to make a decision or settle and be miserable. Well, we're in a day and age where we're not okay with being miserable. So I still see divorce as a rising process or an increase in numbers over time until things kind of level out. It's like, why did we get into these marriages in the first place? This is something that society is trying to work itself through is why am I getting married? Well, is that really necessary? And if it is, okay, am I doing it for the right reasons? So, um,
I actually wrote an article because I see so many issues that it's like, how did you not talk about this before you got married? And
Right.
I said one time, kind of an a quip, because you know some of my good ones. I
Mm.
said, you know, people are more comfortable getting naked in front of someone when they just met them a few hours ago in a bar than they are actually showing someone their credit report. And
Right.
I wrote an article that said getting naked financially with your significant other before you get married. And it was just on that idea of like, why are people so fearful of this one thing yet
Mm.
not of another? It kind of seems crazy. And it was just a funny way to put out a process out there to start what's a hard conversation, kind of with some humor, to just have people think about these things and to give them a plan to walk through it before they got married. Because, man, I think if we had a few of these conversations beforehand, we'd have fewer people
Mm.
getting divorced.
Yes, definitely. I know we're really focusing on the divorce community right now, but for those of our listeners who are considering getting married, I think they should reach out to you for a consultation and maybe some time to really go over the financials of what that looks like, getting into the marriage appropriately financially. And then if you need to back out of it, what does that look like? So I know that you do care tremendously about people and making sure that it's the right decision for them. So let's mitigate some of those issues up front. And I know that you can help people do that. Like you mentioned earlier at the beginning of our episode, you were able to save people from a divorce. And I think that's wonderful. It's brilliant. You've been married your entire adult life. I'm divorced. So we come from different sides of the game here. But I understand your passion for people. Now, for people who are considering marriage and they reach out to you, what is a piece of advice that you would give them straight away when they're looking at their financials, looking at buying a house, all the stuff?
I think that that article I wrote, I can send people like getting naked financially is just an easy, funny way to start. I do a lot of
Mhm.
financial wellness training too, and it really just comes down to that. And when it comes to couples, the thing that I see, and this is an analogy that I use, there are certain things that will keep one spouse up all night, sweating and fearful about, oh my God, while the other one's fast asleep and would double whatever that one thing is and still be
Mhm.
asleep the next night. So whether it's debt, um, you know, buying a house that's a little higher, or
Mm.
um, maybe you know buying a car. There's so many financial pieces. Carrying debt on a credit card from one month to the next. I have some clients who like that would freak them out. They pay their credit cards off every month. And I have others
Right.
who live with balances on their credit card, sometimes by need, others by choice. And sometimes it's situational, but when those risk profiles and risk preferences, oftentimes people don't even call it that. They don't know how to articulate
Mhm.
some of these things. But when those get really different, that's oftentimes when you see issues. They can be
Mm.
different. They don't have to be really close. Oftentimes they are when I work with couples, but there are times when I'll scratch my head and be like, wow, like these people are so different when it comes to their
Mm.
finances. And and I see that very frequently when it comes to couples who are getting divorced. And so I think that's kind of one of those big things I talk about is just what are your risk preferences, tolerances, what makes you uncomfortable, what makes you comfortable, and then what about the other person? And
Mm.
how can you, you know, you can't necessarily split the difference like Chris Voss. I don't know if you're familiar with him, but you know, how can you do things that can satisfy both needs? And so that's a big one.
Mm. That's a great topic. I love that you've brought it out that way because finances is the main reason why people either stay in a bad marriage or get divorced. So when I'm thinking about my experiences and I'm thinking about everything that you said, I want to bring it to this one place of maybe a way of communication that people can use with each other, which is what causes you financial stress? Like talking to their significant other, future spouse or spouse, what causes you financial stress? Right? Because you pinpointed that maybe what causes another person stress doesn't cause me stress, but something that stresses me out doesn't stress them out. But do we have that conversation with people going into relationships? No, we don't. Now, I'm unique because of my profession, where when I'm dating somebody, I ask them about their finances. I ask them about their spending habits. I let them know my credit score. I let them know my debt. I let them know all the things because this is a vitally important aspect to
And
having a healthy relationship.
you're getting naked financially. I mean,
I
that's what I'm
am.
like, that's the article. You are. I mean, that's it. Like it's the script of to do that. But so
Yeah.
many people like just a they just don't they're so fearful of finances they don't have that conversation.
Mm,
Second, they're
mm,
just so fearful of that conversation. Oh my God, I'm gonna seem like a whack job. Yeah, the whack jobs are the ones who never talk about that and then end up getting married.
right.
So, no, like totally think that's the way to go. It's a little unconventional, but I'm a lot unconventional in what I do because I
Mm-hmm.
focus so functionally on what works and what doesn't.
Mm-hmm. Well, you focus on the big picture, and I know this about you. It's something that I work on too, is the big picture, because a lot of people just focus on the here and now. So, yeah, this might be an uncomfortable conversation with your spouse or your significant other, but look at the big picture. You're uncomfortable right now, but guess what? In 10 years, you might be divorced and really, really effing miserable. Like,
Well, if you think having a conversation to get naked financially with someone is uncomfortable, the whole D conversation is 1,000 times worse. And then imagine having it with your
hmm
kids. It's horrible. It's horrible. So,
100%.
so this is part of I learned this from people not getting buy-sell agreements. So a buy-sell agreement is just an agreement that if let's say you and I were going to go buy a ski condo or like a rental property together. So it's a
Mm,
business and we just go buy it. And
okay.
then one of us wants or needs to sell for totally unrelated reasons, or hey, Misty, love you, cannot stand owning a property with you. Sorry, I'm out.
Yeah.
That's really hard if I just say I want to sell tomorrow. You're like, but wait, like that doesn't work, and it
Mm,
causes a ton of problems. Um, so that's actually a case where you can use assumptions too. But
okay.
at
Okay.
the end of the day, it's like, why don't you have a buy sell agreement? All it does is just say, hey, if one of us wants out, one of us could buy the other party out, or
Mm,
or we have to sell, but not tomorrow. But it just gives a path. And what I tell people is, it's not the agreement that's the magic, it's the conversation. So I'm on a
yes.
mission. I am
Yes.
on a mission. And in 2024 and 2025, have a goal of explaining to people that a prenup is simply a buy-sell agreement on property, but with a relationship. If more people have these conversations and a prenup forces you to do it,
Right.
then you talk about these things that people don't just think of, or they're just too afraid to have a conversation. But again, it's so much worse later when you're 10, 20 years into a relationship and your life that you can't get back. And then you've got kids who, frankly, are going to have to pay for your mistake. That's not
hmm
cool.
Yeah.
So, this whole idea is that prenups are not for psychos, not for gazillionaires, and they're not for Hollywood celebrities. They're actually for everybody.
And they're not for
And
trust issues. They're not for trust issues. It's setting yourself up for success.
and that is the exact like that's exactly what I said earlier today on that with that postnup. So a
hmm
postnup is simply an agreement that's made after someone's actually married. So they
Mm,
can be for a variety of reasons, but they're kind of similar. They can oftentimes the catalyst for it is someone gets a big inheritance, sells an asset that they had coming into it, like a
hmm
business.
hmm
It can just be other stuff that's just kind of friction garbage. And in this case, um, the client, the wife, just was very uncomfortable about where she might wind up because her husband had a huge amount of separate assets from business before they got married. And
mm,
she just felt really uncertain about where she would be. And it was starting to kind of monopolize her and like overwhelm her. And it just started causing friction.
okay.
And so I just said, look, like imagine where you want to be later and a fair, reasonable agreement that works for both of you and start thinking about it now. And if you have that set up, so nothing would change. If you truly decided to get divorced and nothing changed for you, like financially, and you still
hmm
felt that same security, because that's what she wants. She wants financial security for her and her children, and then in retirement if they were to get divorced. And she feels very exposed and very at risk without some of those assurances. And so I'm like, this is the other side of it. All we need to do is explain this desire because she's not doing a good job of articulating it and advocating for herself.
Hmm.
And I said, I think that's a big piece of it. But I think once we do that and have that conversation, then all of a sudden this goes away. So my big goal for 2024 and 25, and I've started sharing this with some of the folks in the, that I work with, professional
Hmm.
partners and legal partners, that hey, prenups are for everybody, and frankly, have that conversation. It's a very good one, even if you don't end up formally doing a prenup.
Hmm.
Just the thought process and spending some time understanding what happens, because there is a plan for you if you get a divorce. It's the state of Colorado's plan, and it doesn't work for a lot of people.
Right, right, definitely. Now you mentioned the buy-sell agreements. Do you help people put these together or do you outsource to attorneys?
It depends. I mean, oftentimes it's something that people can do on their own. I always recommend getting legal advice, but really the magic is just in the process. And I tell
Mm,
people, I haven't had a client who did a buy-sell agreement who truly needed one. They really had everything figured out. They never came back and said, "Hey, the agreement says this." It
right,
really, it really was if one of them wanted to buy the other out, they worked it out and did it on their own. So both. There there's a process to it. I can explain it to people, help them walk through it. I prefer for them to just go through it conceptually and I give them some bullet points rather than like, oh, I got to fill this form out, because it's not filling out a form that really is where the process and the benefit is from. It's from, hey, conceptually, here's the ideas. You don't want to get hosed, you don't want to hose them. So it creates empathy by thinking about it from both sides, because oftentimes people will imagine, oh, I'll never want to sell it, they will, or I'll be the one who might need to get out because divorce
mm,
or whatever, job wise or something. So that constantly flipping helps them have empathy for their other partner, another situation. And so it's one of those things where I guide them and then let them decide, do we want to do it on our own? Do we want to get legal advice? I'm not an attorney, so
right.
I can show them a process and a path, but I can't give legal advice. And when it comes down to it, if you're
Hmm.
creating that, an hour or two with an attorney is invaluable. Just in
Right.
the comfort level that you didn't screw something up and you filled it out. I had a lady fill out a form wrong one time, cost her almost 30 grand, like
Mm,
literally checking the wrong
mm.
box. So like there's no mistake that would cost more than an hour or two with an attorney, and you really wouldn't need more than that if you went through the process on your own in advance.
Okay. Now, if a couple or people that are going into a business partnership, like you had mentioned, where they're buying a property to have it as a rental, it's another source of income, but they're in it together. Sometimes it's difficult to start the conversation with the other person. Can people come to you and say, "Hey, I would like you to be a third party in this conversation and help us have this conversation"? Like, can they pay for your time to do that?
Yeah, yes, they can. Generally, that conversation starts because they come to me as an expert in
Hmm.
lending, in particular with investment property and rentals, and they'll start the process of, hey, we want to do this, and I'll say, do you have a buy-sell agreement?
Mm,
No, what's that? Or oh, kind of uncomfortable, and it's like, trust me, the other conversations are so much worse, even when it's family, because oftentimes you'll see family members who will buy property. And here's another big thing I think is going to happen in Colorado. Housing is so expensive. I mean, the average home price is like what, 650, 7.
yeah,
Um,
for a tiny little place. Yeah, yeah,
so
it's crazy.
how does someone in their, mid to upper 20s, early 30s afford a place if they're not married with dual income? It's really challenging.
Hmm.
I think you're going to see more and more people who would be like maybe you and me, or just me and somebody, like we're totally platonic friends,
Right.
and I can't afford to buy a place, you can't afford to buy a place, but we could each afford to buy a 350, $400,000 place on our own. why don't we go together and go buy the house we really want in the neighborhood we really want, and we'll just be business partners. We'll do this. Our plan is 5 to 10 years.
Hmm.
We'll live there. If we end up selling, we now have a down payment for our future. Maybe we get married. Maybe we both end up getting married around the same time, and we just keep this as an investment long term.
Sure,
So there's a
sure.
lot of ways to do that. But that's one of my other things I think we're really going to start seeing is really, I don't know what you call it, the platonic, home buyers. Just like after the housing crisis,
Yeah.
like we had like the accidental landlords, people who didn't ever plan on being a landlord but couldn't sell their house. I think we're going to see people who start to realize that they can do these different arrangements in a good way with someone that they
Hmm.
know, like, and trust that might work for 5 to 10 years, and have that ability to just get their toe in the door. But the bottom of the market in Denver is so difficult right now,
Hmm.
um, because of that fact that the bottom has been pushed up, and there's
Right,
really not a lot of desirable homes for. I mean, unless you go to condo or small condo, small townhome, but single
right.
family is really challenging below 4 or 500,000. Period.
So if roommates want to buy a house together, this is the scenario that we're playing out. And
Exactly.
well, you've got to make sure that you want to buy a house with a roommate first off. So, I mean, regardless of what you guys are looking at doing with your housing situation, with your marriage, with your pre-marriage conversation, even if it's a business partnership, Todd is incredibly knowledgeable on the financial end of things and he knows a lot in this world. So I would suggest that you get on his calendar, pay for a few hours of his time, and really have a conversation with him about all this. You know, the ins and outs, all the details, and you can make an informed decision. Yeah. So, Todd,
Yep.
any closing points that you would love to make?
Um,
Just one or two quick.
yeah, I think there's a lot here that people just don't know, like especially with assumptions. There are so
Hmm.
many professionals who've been in divorce and estate and other for decades and don't know it because it never mattered, so they didn't do it. There's so much misinformation out there. And then even when it comes to these other aspects, whether you're buying a property, having these tough conversations,
Mm.
um, as I've gotten more and more experienced in life, well, gray hair, I've come to the realization that just sitting down with someone and getting their perspective, a few hours of someone's time, it may cost several $100s, but at the end of the day, like mistakes cost thousands to tens of
Hmm.
thousands. And I call them hidden landmines. Sometimes people are walking through a minefield they don't even know is there.
Yeah.
And so just having that expertise to help you avoid these things. And the other is optimizing it. So maybe you don't screw it up. But just the other day, I was like, saved a guy $13,000. Just, well, if you do the same thing, but instead of doing it this way, you go
Hmm.
this way,
Hmm.
it's 13 grand. He's like, really? No, I see what you're saying. And it's like, yeah.
Yeah.
So there's just all those opportunities, and just a conversation with someone can be so valuable and just help you move forward with confidence,
Mm.
not second guess yourself, and then literally not make the mistake too. But I think there's huge value in just anxiety reduction and confidence to move forward with decisions.
Yeah, definitely. So if you guys would love to avoid the landmines in your life, make sure to reach out to Todd. He's an amazing human being on top of extremely knowledgeable, and he has a business of integrity. I've known this guy for a couple of years now, and he's just a great human. So you
Thank
couldn't
you.
be in better hands. Todd, thank you so much. I know we're going to have you back on. I really, really, really appreciate this conversation and you helping us understand what to do in these situations.
You're
Your
welcome.
your
Thank,
knowledge is vast.
thank you so much just for the opportunity. I love just sharing information and knowledge so people can just avoid all this pain.
Mm-hmm. Yep, yep, 100%. Well, thank you very much, and we will see you again soon. Until next time, you guys have a great week.
Thank you for tuning in to the Wealthy Mind podcast. Please be sure to download the Wealthy Mind app today and make sure to support your local Dress for Success.